We have an unbelievably exciting opportunity with central bank digital currencies. We're going to be present when a new universal form of money is created. The last time that happened, we were making a step up from trading in cows. You're going to see the revolution in the money value chain within your lifetime, and it will redefine the role your company plays and its future. How often does that happen? And this session is your opportunity to eavesdrop on the conversations that one of the most critical stakeholder groups is having about what CBDCs should look like, the regulators. As the industry designing this new utility, how are we going to bake in features that will enhance inclusion, stability, and efficiency? And the big hairy part of this discussion, CBDCs have the potential to remove the very last island of anonymity, cash. Will the dawn of the CBDC bring the true end of anonymity in the world? The conversation starts here.
Thank you, everyone, for being here. It goes without saying that it's a relief to be able to gather in person and see everyone in 3D as opposed to just little squares on the TV screen. Already, we're off to a great start, and I'm really excited for the next few days of content. And hopefully, this panel will build on some of the interesting conversations that we're already having. My name is Caroline Emsch. I'm the Director of Government Affairs at American Express, covering our business in EMEA. My background is in government and payments, so I'm glad to have the real experts here to discuss CBDCs, or central bank digital currencies, one more acronym to add to an industry with already probably too many acronyms. I'll leave it to the panelists here to introduce themselves, maybe starting with you, Björn.
Thank you. Björn Segendorf. I've been with the Swedish Central Bank for over 20 years. I've been working with financial infrastructure, retail payment market the last 10 years. I've been spending much time on digitalization, meaning going toward the cashless society, new entrance on the payment market, so on and so forth. And central bank digital currency has been one of those things.
Thank you. Inge.
Yes, my name is Inge van Dijk. I'm a Director of Payments and Market Infrastructure at the Dutch Central Bank here based in Amsterdam. Glad to be here and also glad to see everybody in person. This is a real treat, I would say. I've joined the Dutch Central Bank a year ago in this position, and previously I worked for nearly a decade at ING Group, both retail and wholesale. And before that, actually I started my career at a competitor of yours, which was Eurocard at that time.
We're all friends, so it's okay. And Catherine.
Thank you for having me here. So my name is Catherine. I'm from the Banque de France. I started 6 years ago as a company lawyer on post-market infrastructures and on blockchain and crypto asset legal issues. And I'm now for 2 years in the newly created department for innovation and central bank digital currencies. And I'm now deputy head of this department. And we're leading experimentations on wholesale CBDC mainly, but also on retail CBDC, and we have now completed 7 experimentations since last year, and now still 2 running and should be completed by the end of the year.
Great. Well, it's really a panel of experts, so I'm honored to be here. So now to the panel. How should CBDCs be designed, and what function should they perform to be a trusted medium for payments? It's quite a topic to tackle, but let's start with the basics. It seems about every day we get news that another central bank is dipping its toes into testing CBDCs, from the Bahamas to China. Maybe let's start with the basics. Bjorn, what exactly are CBDCs, and how are they different than the digital money that we use today?
Well, CBDC is quite a long name for something that is not that complicated. So we are here at Money 2020, and then what is money? Money is a claim on the issuer. So when you hold a banknote, it's a claim on the central bank. When you have bank deposits, it's a claim on your bank. So CBDC then is an electronic representation of a claim on the central bank. And we use it to pay with. There are different kinds of CBDCs. You can have them represented as a kind of dematerialized banknote. Then we call them tokens. And you can also have them as a balance on an account, just like ordinary bank deposits. Then there are 2 other versions of CBDC, depending on who you aim them for. So you have wholesale CBDC that would be used for large value payments between financial institutions, and that is very similar to the kind of settlement services that the central banks offer today. So that is very like reserves. It's a kind of reserves offered a bit in a new way. Then you have general purpose CBDC, or we also call them retail CBDC, and they are aimed for retail payment by the general public. So that's a kind of electronic versions of the cash function, you can call it for.
Yeah, well, now that we know the basics, from the perspective of the Eurozone, what do you see as the kind of aim? What problem are we trying to solve here with the creation of CBDCs?
Yes, I think there are many aspects already to consider on the retail, on the wholesale side, and maybe to a certain extent also geopolitics, I would say, Caroline. But let me just first concentrate on what the Digital Euro ECB project entails, which we undertake together with all national central banks, and Catherine is also in there. So we are currently investigating at full length, I would say, digital euro on the retail side, as Björn just indicated. And that means that we're aiming for a digitalized version of cash, risk-free because it's a claim on the central bank, but obviously it needs to comply with all the standards that are already out there on the digitalized payments. It fits with the digitalization of society. It is in sync with the fact that we use less and less cash. We are, I think, on the brink of something relatively new, and we need to consider how to make sure that we stay in control of also the vital aspects of our economy, because that's effectively what payments is. It's like the lubricant of the economy, and if we can't make payments properly and we don't ensure that everybody is included, we will have a big problem. And of course, we also see that where maybe 10 years ago or 15 years ago we had national systems predominantly, the smaller countries have had to take leave of that maybe already earlier on, and now bigger countries also see that the investment is becoming bigger, so we see more and more European systems, we see global systems. So this is really an important stepping stone to investigate at full length what a digital euro retail could do, taking well into account what we have achieved so far with the private sector, because let's not forget that. There's absolutely good news. We have wonderful payments every day, but they are in the hands of the private sector. So we need to consider what reins we want to control as central banks to make sure that it's done for the citizens, because in the end, private parties they respond to shareholders. And we, of course, have to look out for the citizens of Europe to make sure that everybody's included. So the Digital Euro project from the ECB is doing just that, looking at full-length investigation of retail and what position we should take there, if any, and how. And questions will be there to be answered in 24 months properly.
Yeah, still many questions remain, but Artie, you touched on doing it for the citizens. From your perspective, what do you think it will do for financial inclusion, for efficiency, for stability?
Well, it depends if you're considering a wholesale CBDC or a retail CBDC. If I start with the retail CBDC, as the Eurosystem is working on it, the interest for a retail CBDC would be to find a complement and an alternative to cash, as today we pay either in cash or by card, let's say, or by phone. But if you pay by card, it's commercial bank money. If you pay by cash, it's central bank money. And since citizens are less and less using cash, and it has been increased, this tendency has been increased with the COVID crisis, we need, as central banks, as Eurosystem, to provide an alternative to central bank money. And as the citizens and the demand is actually increasing for digital payments, we think that it is important to provide a digital alternative to cash, since cash, is, like Björn said, it's a public asset and it's the safest and most liquid asset. So we have, as central banks, to provide an alternative, and so a complement to card payments, but in central bank money. So this is the interest for retail CBDC, and it could also have a second advantage. It would be that it would foster financial inclusion. Although in the Eurosystem, I guess it is not that big of a problem, but still some unbanked populations might need they need a bank account. Often they cannot open one, so it would be an alternative to have something with CBDC, so a digital wallet, let's say. If you consider then wholesale CBDC, the advantages or the interest for wholesale CBDC would be different. Like Björn said again, wholesale CBDC would be there for interbank settlements, and it could have an interest for cross-border payments, as today cross-border payments are slow, often very costly, especially for remittances. And introducing a wholesale CBDC could fasten up a bit this settlement and reduce costs. So it could have an interest for cross-border payments.
Yeah, the cross-border point is something I want to get to in a second as well. That's very helpful to kind of be able to understand some of the motivations and the purpose from those who are actually designing CBDCs. I guess the question is, how will we get there? And already here in Europe, I know there's plenty of pilots underway. You already mentioned what the ECB is doing with the digital euro. Maybe, Björn, starting with what you're doing in Sweden with the e-krona, maybe you could tell us a little bit more about that pilot and what you've learned.
Well, let us start with the starting point that cash is being marginalized in my country, and that raises a number of fundamental questions. What does it mean if the general public do no longer have access to safe central bank money? I mean, we think that as a kind of anchor for a unified monetary system. And you are at a kind of crossroads. If you go down towards a cashless society, no one knows what that looks like, how it works. And if you go down the CBDC road, no one knows how that works. But anyway, you have to make a choice. So that's why we started to investigate the e-krona, and we started that in early 2017. And let me be very clear that no decisions whatsoever has been made on issuing the e-krona. So if someone tries to sell it to you, don't buy it.
Don't buy it, okay.
But we are now working with a DLT platform called Corda. With that one, you can issue dematerialized banknotes. I used to think of them as tokens. And you can also simulate the kind of distribution model that we have for cash, namely that the central bank issues it redeems it, it sells it to the intermediaries, which here are the private sector entities. And they sell it on to their customers, and they help them administrate these tokens, they initiate payments and so on. So the customer contact, the basic role or the basic division of labor that we have today is still maintained. That is basically it. It's not a pilot, it's more of proof of concept. We have 3 different ways of initiating these payments. It's by card, it's by a smartphone app, it's a smart watch, and we have tested that in a very controlled environment. So what we are doing right now, that is in cooperation with a small number of private sector companies, we are seeing how this concept can be integrated into their IT platform, see if they are also user-friendly for the intermediaries.
Interesting. And Ing, from the perspective of the digital euro, you already mentioned the testing a little bit there. What have been some of the milestones that you reached, or perhaps some of the next ones that you're getting to?
Yeah. Before I do that, Caroline, indeed, also Björn, very recognizable what you said about the cash situation. I think we both have countries that are highly digitalized already. And then again, just 5 years ago, just mere 5 years ago, even this country in Amsterdam was well over 50% cash. So we currently are with the pandemic and everything. And I think we've seen that across Europe, maybe even across the globe, contactless QR, everything has increased in a rapid scheme, spurred by the pandemic. And today we're at just a mere 14% of all payments in the Netherlands is still cash. So that, I think, spurs the interest of the central bank in the vital system. So just to say that up front. And in terms of your question with experiments, yes. Well, early April last year, the Dutch Central Bank launched a report on the CBDC, and I think quickly some others also followed. So the ECB came out with the report in October. And the first thing we did is, alongside that, build some experiments where we just looked at the technical feasibility of the digital euro, just to see if there are anything that could hamper the design. We looked at, by the way, I should say, with Banque de France and the Banca d'Italia and the Bundesbank and the Erste Bank, we undertook quite some resources and many of the private parties out there to investigate in distributed ledger, in shared ledgers, in the privacy versus AML, in limits on circulation, easy access. And to no surprise to me, at least, we found that technically everything is possible, which we already knew, I think, to a certain extent. But it's good to have that proof. But we also found that the combination of centralized and decentralized infrastructures could really work well. And I think we're more advanced there than maybe we were 10 years ago or even 5 years ago. So that's an interesting thing. And on consultation, obviously, you know, we came out in April, or the ECB came out with a consultation report and clearly stated that privacy and security are key. But I think everybody in the room already knows that there's just no business doing in payments if you don't have that upfront secured. So these things will be taken into consideration. So that's a bit of the work that's been done so far.
Yeah, well, it's fascinating. And two things that struck me with what you said, the pace of change, and you mentioned this as well. COVID has really accelerated all of that. And also, you said with technology, everything is possible. It's kind of limitless, but also raises a lot of questions. And Katrien, I know that a lot of questions still need to be answered, but perhaps you could talk a little bit about interoperability and how that might work. And there was just an audience question, which I think picks up on something you mentioned earlier around financial inclusion. Do you not think there may still be quite a high digital barrier to get over? Perhaps if people are excluded from, the banking sector today, will the leap to a CBDC perhaps also be too far? Perhaps two questions to tackle there.
Okay, then the first question on interoperability. As Inge mentioned, everything is possible. And we have now, as I said earlier, completed 7 experiments, and 2 are now still going, but until the end of the year. And out of these 9 experiments, we led 3 experiments on cross-border payments. And these experiments were intended for us to test interoperability in 3 different ways, because each experiment, of course, is designed to be different from the others and to test different aspects of CBDC. And so we therefore decided to test the 3 BIS models of cross-border payments, the multi-CBDC arrangements, they are called like that. And so we tested all of 3, and we came to the conclusion that everything is possible and everything works. Let me explain. We tested, for example, to combine 2 networks that function on the same protocol with common standards, and it works, and we managed to get payments through. We also tested 2 separate networks on 2 different DLTs, and we connected them with a common platform, so a technical platform. It also worked. And the final test was to put on the same network 2 different CBDCs, and we managed to exchange CBDCs and make transactions all the way through. And we did a final test, but it was partly on cross-border. We tested also connecting a network with a classic payment system, and it also works. So everything is possible. It's just now for us up to decide what we want to do, what is the design we choose, and how we want to do things. But technically, everything is possible. So that's a great step already to know that our hands are free. We have everything at our disposal. We have now to choose which design is best. So that was the first question. And the second question you had was...
Yeah, on financial inclusion and whether the digital barrier will still exist with CBDCs.
Well, on financial inclusion, I guess it will be important for inside the Eurosystem I guess the barrier will be maybe a bit difficult for aging people that do not use often a smartphone or a computer. But nowadays, even our grandparents use FaceTime, and with the COVID crisis, they actually accelerated this digital step for them. But nowadays, we see even in emerging economies that people have more and more smartphones, but sometimes do not have bank accounts. And so if we create, for example, but it's just an example, we haven't decided about anything yet, if people would have a digital wallet maybe on an app on the phone, they wouldn't need, in a sense, a bank account or a classic commercial bank account. And so they could have somewhere to store their CBDC. So I guess the step is important because you will need internet, you will need probably a smartphone, but nowadays people have more and more equipped, digitally equipped, and I guess this step won't be that hard.
Yeah, it'll narrow the gap. And
exactly.
Like you said, if my grandmother can use FaceTime, then anything is possible in this world, truly. Maybe just moving on to this, we're talking about consumers and the consumer link. Maybe Bjorn, on the question of trust, and I know this has come up in some of the discussions around the digital yuan and data, how do you think that trust will be built, and will there be international standards that will be agreed upon between all the central banks?
Wow, that's a
big question.
Yes, trust is always difficult, right? But if we look at architecture, central banks are looking into CBDCs for domestic reasons foremost. We all have our own kind of problems, and it's like Leo Tolstoy wrote in Anna Karenina that all unhappy families are unhappy in their own unique way. And the same is also true for countries. So we have different reasons for looking into CBDC. Our markets looks a bit different. Our legislation looks a bit different. Digitalization has gone this or that far. And that means that there's not really a one size fits all here. So there will be differences in technology, a little bit of differences in the division of labor between the private sector and the public sector and so on. But if we take a step back and try to look at the more high-level picture, I think we have an emerging consensus in that central banks wants to do CBDC in cooperation with the private sector. So that means that we want to keep the current order where the central bank is a supplier of services to the financial sector that then is the interface towards end users. Mm-hmm. And there will be a couple of principles governing that. This is a report from last year. It is do no harm, so it shouldn't hurt monetary policy, it shouldn't risk financial stability. We have coexistence, and that means that public money should coexist with private money. So CBDC shouldn't be aimed to crowd out cash, it shouldn't crowd out bank deposits, and so on and so forth. So it's a kind of complement to very much what is out there. And the last one is that CBDC should be it should be good for innovation, for efficiency, and that more you can think of that as CBDC is an infrastructure that authorities can open up more to, say, fintech sector, etc., than what we can do with the current financial infrastructure. And in that way, a CBDC could be this kind of platform for innovation. Yeah, a catalyst for more change in different products that haven't even been built yet.
Maybe moving on from the consumer to the merchant side of it. Inge, how do you think it will change for merchants who are maybe going to now be accepting CBDCs?
Yeah, good question, Caroline. I think I like the word coexistence that Bjorn just used, and I think that's precisely what it's going to describe. I think merchants have always seen new payment options, and sometimes they've had I don't know, I would still remember the photos where they had various terminals on the counter in order to accept the various cards, and then it got integrated, then something new popped up. So they've always had to adapt to new systems. So the key thing will be to make sure that it's somehow not too costly for them, to make sure that they can build on it. But it's like Björn said, it can take time because it's in addition to what they already have today. We should make sure that whatever the retail CBDC does is that it is as good as what we have today, because otherwise it's never going to fly. So QR, contactless, all those items need to be in there. It's just not good enough to build a basic wallet. We need to have something that's PERS. And of course, this is something that we cannot do ourselves. We have to have the private sector is much more suited to that, but it has to be something that has a claim on the central bank side. I think that's where the balance comes in, that it's risk-free, that's an additional option, and maybe also a much safer payment method to accept than any crypto or stablecoin that could come around the corner, which is the other, I think, innovation that is interesting to watch and to see. And I think one of the benefits that I would point out is also the fact that even with all the good developments that we've had in Europe so far, we haven't seen really a harmonized e-commerce solution. It's just not there, even though we've had many good alternatives, national solutions, certainly here, but also in Sweden and other countries. So this is something that is still out there. And I would argue that the physical point of sale solution, that's gone. We already see that it's the virtual point of solution that has the future. So we should build for something that is a virtual point of solution for the merchant and make sure that that's then up to par, but based on the central bank claim. I think that would be the key thing. For them, it's nothing new, but we just have to take into account that it takes time to build reach in order to get the consumer to be able to pay. Because in the end, I think it would be horrible if we are in a situation where cash is so small in numbers, that you can't accept cash anymore at a merchant, or the merchant won't be able to safely bring it to the bank. And we already see that happening today. We have these discussions in the Netherlands. We're currently talking to all of the parties and the stakeholders to ensure that we keep the continuity of cash up, because it's becoming too small to warrant a safe continuity of payments into the future. So this is truly something that is very important to consider. And maybe just on the inclusion part, we also see here in the Netherlands already a bit the downside of the digitalization, because so many people, and I'm not even talking about the elder that Anne-Catherine pointed out already very truly, we're talking about, well, we're conducting a study, probably 1 million or 1.5 million, so that's 10% of the public here that is having a difficult time paying digitally. So we should take those people into account when drafting a retail CBDC. I think that's our goal and our target, so to speak.
Yeah, certainly. And the point you made about the private sector needing to be on board, I think that's a really important one, and maybe gets to kind of the next bit that I wanted to talk to about in terms of how scared or how much change should the banking industry and the payments industry be bracing themselves for? What are your thoughts on that?
I think that the banking industry shouldn't be scared. On the contrary, they should be reassured that the digital euro project won't be done against banks, but with them. Because we have seen that that our banking sector and our banking industry is working properly, is efficient, and is robust enough to maintain financial stability. So we want to keep them on board. And the Eurosystem launched a market advisory group where market participants are invited to participate. And I really call here upon all market participants to actively participate to this group, because this group will help conceptualize the digital euro and think through the distribution of the digital euro, so they really they can actively participate, and we really call them upon to do so, because we cannot do it without banks.
It's a partnership, exactly.
Exactly.
Yeah, and what about for retail payments? Again, I think you've stressed that there should be collaboration, it'll be a complement, but if you look again to the digital yuan, just as an example, because it is quite advanced, where it could perhaps displace some payments if they're able to get money from A to B very efficiently and at no cost. What will the impact be for retail payments?
Difficult to say, but I think we're a bit different from China in Europe. We've had already different developments, I think, in payments. So you always need to consider where you come from, your history and your legacy. So I think that paints the picture for us a bit different, but of course very interesting to see and to watch how the China develops and also other initiatives around the world, like you just mentioned in the beginning, with Barbados and other countries taking up the digital euro. I see a lot of innovation based on a request to pay spurred by a transfer. So all of these developments are somewhat similar, whether you look at Apple Pay or Google Pay, they're all heading in the same direction. So I would say that's definitely something to take into account. But in the end, we are central bankers, so our job is to watch out for accessibility, everybody can join, the stability is safeguarded. So in those aspects, I think that's where our job lies, whereas the added value of a true good customer experience or seamless or ease of use, that's much more on the private sector. So very much agree with what Anne-Catherine is saying. I think it could go very well hand in hand. It must go hand in hand. So I support the call Anne-Catherine is making. Go to the Market Advisory Group and join us, making sure that we make the wisest decision for the benefit of Europe, I would say.
Yeah, no, and that's a great point, because my next question was going to be whether or not you see this changing your role as a central banker, if you're having to kind of answer some of these questions that would maybe typically be answered by a business, by a private sector. But do you see your role and what you've been doing in terms of exploring CBDCs changing the role of central bank?
Not really, but it's still an open question, because when we see cash being marginalized and we are talking about issuing a new form of central bank money, we are really talking about how should we arrange our future monetary system and retail payment market in the digital era. What role should the state have? What role should the central bank have? And that is ultimately, it's a mix of, economics, politics, philosophy. So it's nothing that central banks really themselves can sit down and give a good answer to. So what the Riksbank did about 2 years ago was that we wrote to the Swedish Parliament asking them to launch an investigation, a rather broad one, on exactly this. What is the role of the state in the future monetary system, retail payment market, what about digital currency, etc., etc. Because the legislation that we have today, when it comes to the central bank's mandate, is, it's in our case over 30 years old. So
the rules need to be rewritten in a way or updated.
So we don't really know what our political masters comes up with, but I would be very surprised if it is a radical change against today. So my feeling for it and the international work that central banks are doing, it's all pointing in that we will basically keep the current division of labor between the public and the private sector. It might change somewhat here and there, but basically we will keep on doing what we are doing today.
Yeah, well, I like the way you added in philosophy there, because I think some of these questions that we are grappling with, they are philosophical in a way. Maybe just to kind of wrap up as we look ahead to the future, and Catherine, what do you see as some of the kind of remaining hurdles? Obviously, there's still many questions to be answered, but if there are a few that you do see as really a point to overcome, what would you say those are?
I guess the main hurdles will be to get this CBDC widely adopted, and to do so, we have to convince that it's a new use of new payment solution, new payment asset, but that it has some interest. And to do so, as Inge said, it must be easy to use. So we have to find a design here that is easy to use for citizens and merchants, for both of them, and that is not too costly. Because if it's too costly, citizens, merchants will use the less costly solution. So we have to find here a design with banks, again, to find a solution that is easy to use and that is not too costly. That's the first thing. The second thing is that it has to be well designed so that there won't be any eviction, monetary eviction in third countries, so that other countries using other currencies than their own currencies, so emerging economies mainly, won't see their own money evicted and to use, for example, a foreign CBDC. That's the first thing. And on European ground, we have to also make sure it's well designed so that there won't be any deposit fee, and that the credit, the cost of credit won't increase. So it has to be well designed on these two aspects.
Yeah,
I guess that's the main point, since on the technical part, everything is possible.
like you said, yeah, everything is possible. And Ing, what about for you? Maybe just your own curiosity. What's the part that you're trying to solve for or really want to see an answer to?
No, there's many puzzles to be discussed. I think reach is definitely always one of the key things to tackle whenever you want to launch a payment instrument. But here, I think the combination of the coexistence, the distribution model, and how we do that together. Is it going to be for free, like the Chinese yuan, or are we going to go more into regular models where we have a fee of sorts for services? Those are some of the key questions, and I think also we have quite some research to do in the area of the mandate in terms of issuing a digital euro and the legislation around that. So. Left and right, many interesting topics. So for sure, those 24 upcoming months are going to be quite a pressure cooker for the central banks, I would say, in terms of identifying, making sure that we have everything well investigated to allow us to make a decision whether or not to roll out and how to roll out. So this is quite a serious investigation phase, and it's going to be a roller coaster, I think.
Well, it's great already to see the collaboration between central banks and the learnings that you can leverage together. Maybe just closing question. When do you think, realistically, I'll be using a CBDC to buy my next coffee?
Depends on where you live. We see that emerging markets are really rushing forward. We have, as you mentioned, Bahamas Sand Dollar. They have issued it. We are aware of the large-scale pilots in China. We know that other emerging markets are really working quick on their own CBDCs. So they're in near time, I guess. But if you're looking to the rich world, I would say that it's at least 5 years away.
So still some time to come yet.
Yeah.
I think maybe there should be a prize for the best named new digital currency, and I think the sand dollar is particularly creative. But on that note, thank you guys all for your time. The audience, thank you for your questions. I really appreciate it, and looking forward to seeing what, as you said, the next 24 months hold for CBDCs. Thank you.
Thank you, Caroline.
Thank you.
Thank you.